seconds.
It should be in a couple seconds.
Yes.
And no, not yet.
A couple more seconds.
A couple more seconds. Do you have to click something else, or we just have like a?
I think it should.
It should be good.
Should we get there?
Because we got Bev, Gene, and Ann. Yeah. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Yeah, we're live.
All right.
Okay, and there's probably me staring at things there for a couple seconds because of the delay. Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Sewing. I don't even know where we're sewing today. Anyway, welcome. A couple things first. I am working on getting the April calendar up to date. We did just get Luminaires Owners Club is now on the April calendar, and I think that's all I've got right now. We are making we've got a class, the Flower Patch Table Runner that everybody was in last Saturday. That's been we have to do another Saturday to finish that up, so that's going to be the 8th of April. And we're also going to run that class on Tuesday, April 4th. So there's a few things on the calendar. Check that out. What's that look for, Danny?
I was curious what he was bringing you.
Oh, some new fabric. And so that's pretty much all we have right now. I was hoping to have more on the calendar before we started today, but it's been a rough week and a crazy morning. But we did get some new fabric in, and it's some cool fabric. It's very similar to a collection that we had before, which is why we picked it up. And it's basically, this is kind of a cool... you've got two strips in this guy here. You got this purple strip. This is yardage. This is not a panel, so you've got like this purple strip here in the center panel. But very similar to the, what was the collection called that we had that one with? Heartscapes, yes. What is this like?
Same design.
Yeah, same designer. So Heartscapes, which we already have in here, is very similar. You had like those medallions and stuff. We had a quilt up for that. So we'll be putting up a, there is going to be a kit probably that goes with this. There was a pattern, right, Danny, that we had with this?
Yes.
Yep. So there will be, if you check our website out, there you'll see a picture of the kit that we'll be putting together. But it's just a really nice, like I said, the Heartscapes was really a really fun collection. And so when I saw this is kind of the follow-up collection, you've got those really cool, kind of that medallion thing going on there. So really neat, really nice geometric, and like I said, we have some stuff already in the store that goes with it quite nicely. And then this one here is going to be popular. That goes with it, but I can see this getting used in all sorts of other stuff. And then the pièce de résistance, as they say. If you've seen the Jane Austen kits that we have, this is actually the backing that goes with that. I mean, it goes with a lot of other stuff as well, but this is just a really fun backing. And if you really like, and if you have the Jane Austen kit or you like that Jane Austen kit, we have the backing that's going to go with that. And hopefully we'll have the sample done here pretty soon. Brenda's been having a lot of fun with that. So that's the new stuff that just came in late last week, early yesterday. So that's all of that excitement. And yes, there's that. Anything else we need to add, Eddie, for news?
I don't think so.
Don't think so? Okay, spring is in the air.
Some charm packs.
Some charm packs? For,
Yeah.
oh, see, I'm out of the loop. Which camera am I on? That doesn't tell me anything. I'm hoping that's camera one. Oh, these. See, I remember when I order these. Yes, I order stuff and then it comes in. So yeah, I don't know why I order charm packs. I usually get layer cakes. But my suspicion is because it's such a cute, it's just, it's a Moda charm pack delivered with love, which means that we're probably going to have some of the yardage coming in shortly. Because usually I get the charm packs and Moda's, the charm packs tend to be a little bit ahead of the yardage. And I totally forgot that I ordered this. But now that I'm looking at it, it's got little elephants in balloons. Really cute little charm pack. It's called Delivered with Love. You're going to have elephants and stars and all that cuteness. And my suspicion is, like I said, we'll have some, we'll have the yardage coming in here shortly. Because it's Moto, we usually get the pre-cuts first and then followed by the yardage in a little bit. Okay. Oh, Janice has a really interesting question. How do you use the one with the salvage stripe? That's a good question, Janice. Truth is, you have to, it's kind of like working with an ombre, I would think, in that you have to kind of think in this direction versus this direction. My suspicion is that the pattern that this is in is going to call for like a yard and a half or a yard and a quarter and you're going to strip it in this direction so that you can get this stripe out of it and then get that center piece out. I haven't, but when you get a stripe like this, a lot of times, like I said, it's kind of like working with an ombre that you have to think in the other direction. But I haven't played with it yet to come up with anything, but maybe we'll do that at some point. Just, maybe that'll be a future show, how to work with the stripe going in the wrong direction. Anyway, any other questions before we continue on? Wow, we're just busting through this, Eddie. All right, because the top 5 was so much fun, the top 5 rulers was so much fun last week, and why is that making noise? My phone is making noise at me because I probably should turn my volume off. There we go. So we're going to do another top 5 today. My top 5 favorite quilting myths. Years ago, I was going to write a book on quilting myths. Well, no, I've had this idea for a book, but I don't have the patience nor the, I don't think there's enough material to do it. So we're just going to do a quick top 5 list. If you've been quilting for a while, which a lot of you have, or if you haven't and you want to learn to quilt, you hear all of these crazy things about quilting. Like there's all these unwritten rules that we're all supposed to be familiar with. And I put together, we got 5 of them that we're going to cover today. There's a lot more, but these are 5 that, a couple of them are personal pet peeves, and then the others are just, good information to have. So, we're going to start with the first one, the old school one. The one that dates back to the days to the atomic age, when we first discovered nuclear fusion and started blowing stuff up. And that is polyester thread. Because polyester is a modern marvel brought to us by DuPont. No, I think it's DuPont. But anyway, there is a myth out there that polyester thread is bad. And I know a lot of you already know that it's not. Because if you do any sort of machine embroidery, most 40 weight machine embroidery thread is going to be polyester. Polyester thread is nice because it's a lot less expensive than cotton often. You get a lot of cotton poly blends. But there is a myth out there that polyester thread is bad to quilt with and sew with because it could tear your fabric or ruin your fabric. And that's kind of an old school one. Another one that's kind of related to it is you can't mix cotton and poly thread because, again, the poly is so much stronger it's going to tear through the cotton thread. And those are all myths. This is myth number 1. Polyester thread is bad. This is a myth. If your polyester thread is cutting your cotton thread or cutting your fabric, you have much bigger issues with what you're doing than the thread. That is a huge tension issue. One of the reasons that a lot of these kind of myths, the polyester myth started is because polyester thread is often a lot stronger than cotton. And you can use that thread to cut, if your tension is off, you could possibly cut your cotton fabric. You don't see it as much with the newer stuff, but that's kind of where it started, is back in the old days, the olden times. Polyester thread is so much stronger that you could possibly, there is a possibility you could cut your fabric with it or tear your... But if you're doing that with your thread, the tension on your machine is all off. So the idea that polyester thread is bad or that you can't mix polyester thread with cotton thread is a myth. Especially with modern technology and the way that they're doing it, it's a much... the consistency and quality is there. But if that does come, like I said, there is some truth to it from back in the day. You could cut your fabric with it, but that, like I said, it's your, if you're running into that, it's definitely a tension issue. It's got nothing to do with the thread. Well, I mean, it does because the thread can cut it because it's so much stronger. But that, there are a few things to consider, though, with polyester thread. One of the other things, the other reasons that some people say you can't do poly thread is because it shrinks different than cotton and it's stronger than cotton, and this is true. But keep in mind that if you're worried about your thread outlasting your quilt, you'll probably be dead and buried before that's a problem. Before, oh my gosh, my thread is lasting longer than my quilt. That's not a bad thing. There is issues with if you're environmental with polyester. If you're going to have it outside, there is a UV degradation issue that you would have to be concerned with. But in all honesty, if you have a quilt outside, the environmental degradation of that quilt is going to be probably much more rapid than the thread itself. But polyester thread, honestly, is there's nothing wrong with it. Use it. All right. So that's the first myth. Polyester thread is bad. Myth number 2, kind of related to that, is mixing fabrics, because like I said, there is a myth about mixing poly and cotton that you get problems. And then when I was putting this together, I was checking some quilting boards and stuff too to make sure that I wasn't just me that heard these things. And there's you go on any quilting forum, you can find threads that are 600 pages long about mixing fabric. Can you mix poly and satin? Can you mix flannel and cotton? And the thing that is going to be pervasive around this is going to be myth number 5, that you can do this wrong. But you can mix fabrics. There's nothing wrong with mixing fabrics. You can mix batiks and cottons. You can want cotton and flannel. You can put some poly blends in with you can mix it all. It's not a problem. The issue comes when you start mixing fabric is that the myth that it's bad, there's some truth to the fact that different fabrics will shrink differently when you wash them. So if you mixed your poly with your cotton and you didn't pre-wash anything, then when you wash that quilt, one square is going to shrink differently than another square. And that can cause some problems, or I don't know if it's problems, but it will cause some issues with your top if it's an extreme difference. Most of this, though, is mitigated kind of in modern quilts because most people are having their stuff top stitched. So the real big difference in shrinkage isn't going to be huge because it's top stitched, and that will help kind of keep that from tearing seams and stuff. But the difference in shrinking is an issue when you mix fabrics. That is something to consider. Really easy way to mitigate that problem is just pre-wash everything. If you pre-wash everything, you pre-shrink it, and that problem kind of goes away. Now, and that's the big reason when you're mixing fabrics is something to consider is the different shrinkage rate. I don't really worry about it that much. Unless I've got a real low quality cotton that I'm not sure where it came from, then there's you might get more of a shrinkage than is acceptable. But most of the modern, quilt shop stuff is not going to have like this huge 10% shrinkage. I believe the average should be right around 3, maybe 5%. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's not a huge difference. You're not going to see a huge shrinkage on most of your quality cotton. But that is the reason for myth number 2, mixing fabrics. That's the reason for the myth is that they will shrink differently, but it's not bad. Sew it together. It's not the end of the world. Quick, easy way to fix it is just to pre-wash it. And yes, and Rhonda does make a very valid point. This is about the poly thread, but this is also something to consider when you're mixing fabrics, is polyesters, because of the process of dyeing them, will tend to have brighter, more vibrant colors. And so if you're looking to make a real kind of a bright, vibrant quilt, mix some polys in there with it. They'll also fade a little differently as well. That's another thing to keep in mind, that because the dye process is different between a synthetic fabric and a natural fabric, when over time and a lot of use, you're going to find that the cotton will probably fade faster than the poly if the poly is dyed properly. And that's another thing to consider, that over time you will start to notice a big difference in fabric as well. But that's, again, quilt your own quilt. Anyway, here's one of my favorites. This is one of my favorite myths. This is something I have. I would tell everybody that I should save this one for last, but I've got it in number 3 on here. So we're going to do it as number 3. We're just busting through these, so I'm going to take some time on this one. One of my favorite things is people come in and ask us to help them pick colors or prints. And I'm always happy to. That's my favorite part of this whole thing. That's my favorite thing to do, is pick colors and prints. And then set it home, you make it, and you bring it back, and I get to see it. And I was like, that came out really nice. And I didn't have to do any of the work. But I got to see what the color selection came out like. One of my favorite things is when people come in and they're looking for a border print. They're like, I got to put a final border on this. What do I do? And I'll go pull a really cool border and show it to them. And they're like, you can't use it. And why won't they use it, Eddie? Because it's not in the quilt. There's this weird thing that the border, this weird myth, this weird idea that the border fabric has to be in the quilt, or the color of the border fabric has to be in the quilt. But that logic doesn't make any sense, because take any one of your fabrics out of the quilt top, and it wasn't there before you put it there. Like, there wasn't red fabric in there until you put the red fabric in there. So why do we suddenly think that we're limited to what we can put on the border? And to illustrate this fact, I've got this old school quilt, and no, we probably have no more of this fabric anywhere in the store. This is an old school thimbleberries. This was actually based on a pattern. If you look at this quilt, you see that outer border? Is that border anywhere in this quilt? No. And if you really look close, you'll see some of the colors in that border aren't anywhere in that quilt either. The red actually in the border is a little bit different than the red in the quilt. But I wanted to show you that don't get hung up on this idea that if you've got a really nice fabric that you really like and looks good with the quilt, that you can't use it because it's not in the quilt. That's the biggest misconception, like I said, it's one of those things that kind of, I don't say irritates me, but it's something that comes up a lot when I'm helping people pick fabric. I'm like, well, you need a border. And they want to do a border. And I tend to gravitate towards large prints for borders because if you have a wide border, a nice large print really looks nice on the border, but then inevitably it'll be like, well, I don't have that fabric in the quilt. Okay. Or that color's not in the quilt. Okay. Doesn't need to be. Just needs to look good with what you made. There's no rule that says that your border has to be in the quilt. Because like I said, there was no color in that quilt top till you put it there. So the color's not in the quilt. Put it in the quilt. That's the beauty of what we're doing. We're making it ourselves. So that's, as you can tell, I'm kind of passionate about this one. That whole myth that it's got to be in the quilt doesn't need to be. And that brings me to something that I did put on my list.
Janice Kelly asked about
rayon thread.
Rayon thread.
Rayon thread, to me, I don't like rayon thread. This is a side note.
What is rayon thread?
Rayon thread is a synthetic thread. Where it differs from poly is that the problem you run with polyester thread is the way the fibers are made in polyester, you can't dye polyester. If you try to like tie-dye polyester, you're going to find that dyes don't hold really well with polyester. So the problem with thread is you can't get a variegated polyester. You can go look for one. I don't think one exists. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure you can't get a variegated polyester. Because of the dyeing process, those strands are dyed ahead of time before they make the fiber. So you can't dye it after the fact to get kind of a variegated look. Rayon is more similar to cotton in the way that you can dye it, which is why you'll see a lot of really interesting kind of rayon fabrics, especially for wearables, that kind of replace cotton, like the rayon scarves. I think Island Boutiques did a lot with rayon, and they still probably do, because you can dye rayon is a very similar dye process to cotton. So that is why you see a lot of rayon, is because it allows you to do a lot of the same dyeing techniques as you get with cotton. You can't do that with polyester. The nature of the try painting a PVC pipe is a great example. PVC pipe is basically styrene, but it's very similar, chemically speaking, to polyester thread. Spray paint it. You can spray paint PVC pipe paint it with anything you want, and give it time, and the paint just will end up flaking off of it. Polyester thread is very similar. You cannot dye it once that thread has been made, whereas rayon is more similar to cotton in the manner that you can dye it. So that's why you see rayon threads a lot of time is as a synthetic alternative to cotton. So rayon will be a little less expensive than cotton, but it's a synthetic, and it doesn't bring to the table anything better than cotton. Rayon is, from a strength standpoint, very similar to cotton. In fact, it's probably a little bit weaker. The only thing that I think rayon has over cotton is going to be price point. I think rayon tends to be a little bit less expensive than cotton, but it doesn't have any of the benefits that you're going to get with polyester, which is strength, which is why a lot of your machine embroidery thread is polyester, because it's going to be a little bit stronger, holds up to the faster machines, and a little bit more abuse than a rayon will. So that's a complete side note. But yes, rayon is also a good thread. The big difference is the dyeing process. It's a synthetic that you can dye very similar to a natural thread versus polyester, which the way you get colors in polyester is much different than how you get it in cotton. I hope that answered the question. But rayon thread is good. You can get some very beautiful colors in rayon because of, again, the dye process. And I was just going off about colors in the board. What was I going on? There was a tangent I was going to go on that, Eddie. What was that?
I don't know.
Colors. I was going to go on a tangent onto colors because I don't know, have we done a Color Theory?
You did.
Okay. Go back and watch the color theory. There is some really interesting color theory out there. And color theory is based on science and wavelengths and all that stuff. There's some science behind color theory, which means that color theory is objective, meaning it's data based, versus subjective, versus it's just my opinion. So there is some science to it. But one thing to keep in mind about quilting is it's also very subjective. Like, my opinion about my stuff is more important than what the data says or the objective info about it. So a lot of times people get stuck on this idea of colors. I can't put, I don't know, what's two colors you can't put together, Eddie? Throw it out there, anything.
I don't.
You can't think of one? Like pink and red. Some people don't like to do pink and red. Like different shades of red with, or like orange and pink maybe. Orange and pink is probably a good one. Would you think orange and pink? Is that it?
Orange and pink on the fabric behind you.
Yeah, I know. See, so that's why some people don't like Tula Pink, is because of that. But one of the things you're going to run into, especially with colors, is people have these very set ideas of you can't put this color with that color. And like I said, in color theory, there is some, with triads and the color triads are on the color wheel and all that. There is some color theory that would say that certain colors should not go with other colors, complementary versus and all that crap. But the truth is, at the end of the day, if you like the way it looks, go with it, because it's your quilt. And I will tell you, I don't think they're watching. If they are, they won't know I'm talking about them. One of the first quilts I ever had to do was a hideous quilt. It was like a lime green. It was lime green and pea green on a black background. I'm not even joking. I saw it and I'm like, what is going on? And this is the old days, before I could just push the button and let it go. It was the old days where I had to sit and drive the machine. So, and not only is this a hideous quilt, I'm driving the machine. I have to look at it while I'm doing it. And it was, but I will tell you what, by the time I was done doing it, it kind of grew on me. And I really liked it by the time I was done. But when I first saw it, I'm like, who in their right mind would make this? And I guess it's kind of like an ugly baby. Over time, it kind of grows on you. And also, like an ugly baby, the mother thinks it's the cutest thing in the world. The same thing with an ugly quilt. Over time, it'll grow on you, no matter how ugly it is most of the time. And the person that sewed it probably loved it. And, that should be enough for anybody. So, keep that in mind. Like I said, we're still only on quilting myth number 3, which is the border color thing. But there is no real rule about colors. If it looks good to you, go with it. Don't get hung up on it. And again, not in the quilting myth thing here, but something I want to throw out there is you're allowed to throw stuff out. This is a secret that I think a lot of people don't understand when it comes to quilting. You can throw it away. If you get a block together and it's looking like garbage and you are just like, this is hideous, throw it away. Cleanse yourself of it, and move on to the next project. I have done that with 3 projects. I just got rid of them. I mean, you could give them to like a friend, I suppose, but I mean, if you think it's ugly and hideous and awful, why would you pass that on to somebody? And I know, I'm the guy selling you the fabric, so me telling you to throw it away is kind of like, come buy more fabric. But the truth is, there's something very liberating. Once you cross that bridge once, you only got to do it once. Once you just throw a project away once, it's very liberating, because then you can do it again, and it's very easy. And it really, you don't have it hanging over your head. I don't know if there's anybody out there that has that. I like Janice. I like what Janice has to say. If the colors are in your yard, why question Mother Nature's color choice? That's exactly. But don't be afraid to throw stuff out. You can do that. It's not against the rules. You can just throw it away. It's very liberating. And you don't have, because what's the difference of throwing out a project you know you're never going to finish versus storing it for 25 years and then throwing it out? Because, you're going to come back to it 20 years later and be like, oh, I'm never going to finish this, and you get rid of it. Get rid of it now. Just move it out, because it's going to free up storage space for something you would rather be working on, and you don't have it hanging over your head. So get rid of it. You have my permission. You've been granted permission from Brent, who doesn't really have the authority, but self-appointed. Throw it away. Anyway, This is true. Dogs don't care if their beds are made from ugly fabric, and shelters will. Yes, there's a lot of places to put ugly fabric and ugly quilt blocks and ugly. Yes, but I will tell you, do yourself a favor and go into your stash and find a project that you started 20 years ago that you know you're never going to finish. Take it out of your stash and put it in the garbage. And I will tell you what that is a very liberating. It brings you like to the next level. That's like how you level up in quilting. To get to that next level, find a project you're never going to finish and get rid of it. That's the tip of the day. All right. We're only number 3. I thought I was going to bust through these, but we're doing all right. Next quilting myth. This is the other big one I get phone calls about all the time. For some reason out there, people think that there's a standard for quilt sizing. Right, Eddie?
Yeah.
Standard quilt size? What's the standard size of a king quilt? King size quilt?
I don't know. Like, I know people come in and say it's king size.
Yeah, I've got a king size quilt, right? I've got a queen size quilt. I've got a twin size quilt. So, like, there's this idea that out there that there's this weird standard size that by you telling me that you have a twin size quilt that I will know in my head what those dimensions are. That is a myth. There is no standard size of quilts. Doesn't exist. There is none. Now, I'm going to go on a tangent here because this is also part of a much broader problem that we have in the quilting world of quilts versus bedspreads. But let me just show you where there is some standardization in the industry. You don't see standard quilt sizes. However, because we're civilized people, they have standardized mattress sizes for the most part. So most mattresses are going to fall within a standard size because people like bed frames and you want your bed frame to match your mattress size. So mattress sizes have been standardized. And I'm going to drop some interesting knowledge on you. So when I say king size quilt, well, we got a chat going on. We'll give it a second. How big is a king size quilt? I'm going to ramble for a minute, but put in the comments right now just your dimensions of a king size quilt. And it's going to be interesting, and I want this because this is going to kind of prove my point. Because, like I said, there is no standardized quilt size. But people have an idea that there's a standard, and the standard that I would go by is a mattress size. So when somebody says a king-size quilt, it's made for a king-size bed. What's the And so I'm hoping that somebody puts some stuff in the comments here in the next couple minutes of standardized king-size quilt. Because you know what the standard king-size mattress is? What do you think standard king-size mattress, Eddie?
Is it like... Because I know the batting's like 120 by
Yes.
140.
And that brings us to Eddie makes another point that there is kind of standardized batting sizes that the different companies will use that kind of... And so, for example, a king-size batting is 120 by 120, generally speaking. It'll differ a little bit by manufacturer, but 120 by 120 is going to be a very standard size for a batting, which then kind of comes to the standard size of which people then assume is a quilt size. And now, okay, we've got some good. So a king size quilt, 90 by 109, and then 110 by 100. See, these are fantastic answers because, again, and then Eddie told us the batting size is 120 by 120, which I've got a little cheat sheet here that tells us all this. Guess what the standard mattress size for a king size quilt is? 76 by 80. Think about that for a second. We're just going to round that up. 80 by 80. So when somebody says I have a king size quilt, or I want a quilt that fits on a king size bed, well, an 80 by 80 quilt will fit the top of a king size mattress, right? If the mattress itself is 80 by 80, or 76 by 80. So when somebody says I have a king size quilt, now, and I really do appreciate the comments because like the two that came in, the 90 by 109 and the 110 by 100, those would actually be closer to a full, large full, or large double to a queen size on how we measure our quilts. Because we actually, for our long arming, we actually are a little bit downsized. So if somebody says I have a king, it usually falls under a queen or even a full sometimes. But that is the big quilting myth that I want to talk about, is there's no standard size. And that brings me, like I said, to my other thing of a bedspread versus a quilt. because the sizes mentioned here, 90 by 109 or 110 by 100, that's a pretty that would be a decent king size to me. And what that will give you on an 80 by 80 mattress is it will then drape over the sides by about 10 inches on each side. Because that's really what people want. You don't just want the cover, you don't want just the top covered, you want it to drape a little bit over to the sides. So that's why our quilt sizes are a little bit bigger than our mattress size. But it brings us to another problem that I often run into is they want it to drape down to the floor. You're making a quilt for somebody for their wedding and they have all these demands. Because when you offer to make a quilt for somebody, it can't just be like, thank you, what are you gonna make me? It's gonna be like, okay, it's gotta be purple and blue, and it's gotta fit this. It's got to fit the color schemes in my bedroom, and it has to drape. They've got all these. And it's like, and when people start telling that to me, I'm just like, well, you can make it yourself. You're gonna get what you get from me. But the problem is, they're thinking of a bedspread. They want the quilt to drape down to the floor. That is not what a quilt is for. A quilt is to sleep under and keep you warm. What I would tell you, if somebody wants it to drape to the floor, find a bedspread that coordinates with your quilt, put it underneath, and put the quilt on top. So it drapes and covers your mattress, but the quilt still looks nice. Because you don't need these giant quilts. Because the other thing you run into if you do get into like a 120 by 120 quilt, that's a monster to move. I mean, that's a heavy quilt. I mean, you could put some poly. There's ways to make it a little bit lighter, but it's a heavy quilt. But anyway, that's my that's only myth number 3, and we're into the half hour. So myth number 3 that there's a standardized. No, I'm sorry, that was myth number 4. We're doing all right. That there's a standard size quilt. There isn't. There is a standard mattress size. There is not standard quilt sizes, and depending how far down you want it to go, that's going to be the size. And honestly, like I said, that's why my favorite size quilt is a 60 by 80. 60 by 80 to me is the perfect size quilt. That is, believe it or not, the exact same size as the top of a queen size mattress. But 60 by 80 is not so big that you can't drag it out to the living room and watch Netflix under your blanket. It's not so big that you can't throw it into the washing machine and then have to wait 6 days for it to dry in the line because it's monstrous, or you throw your back out pulling it out of the washing machine because it's just this huge behemoth. 60 by 80 to me is the perfect size quilt, and I will be, if anybody asks me how big should I make it, my answer is 60 by 80 or in that ballpark. 50 by 70, I wouldn't go much bigger than 60 by 80. 50 by 70, right in there is a perfect size for a quilt. And just as a side note, the other reason that 80 works so well is if you have a back and you just want to piece one seam down the middle at 42-inch fabric with a 1/4-inch seam, it's going to give you like 82 long, so you don't have to get super fancy with the backing as well. Whole nother story. But 60 by 80 to me is the perfect size. And like I said, it doesn't quite fit a king size, but it will fit a queen size. Fits half of a king size. That's what we do in our house. Is I have my quilt on my side, and Sarah gets her quilt on her side. Now, if I want 6 quilts on my side, I'll just stack them up, and she'll stack up hers. But 60 is half of the 120 that most people usually make a king. And anyway, side note. So that brings us to the very last quilting myth, which we probably should have started with because it would have been better for YouTube when you have those little those new quilters that are like on YouTube. How do I quilt? And then they come across this, quilting myth. And the biggest thing that I run into here at the store is somebody comes in, I'm a beginner quilter, I'm doing it wrong, how do I quilt type thing. There is no wrong way to quilt. The thing about quilting in general, it's not like sewing. Well, even sewing, there's really no wrong way, but there's best practices. The thing to keep in mind is this is a hobby, and this is supposed to be fun. So if you're having fun while you're doing it right. When Becky's on here with me, we go back and forth with some stuff because she does things a lot different than I do on some stuff. But you know what? We both have a good time because to do it right, you have to be having fun. And that is the big thing that I see, especially with quilting, when you get like these little groups together and they're all quilting together and somebody's like, well, I must be doing it wrong because all my friends are doing it a different way. Well, no, you're just doing it different. There's not, how's the saying go? There's more than one way to skin a cat? That's not the saying?
Sounds like a saying.
But I guess we're going to make that a saying. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Because you can arrive at the same place a lot of times with quilting through different techniques and different ways of getting there. There are definitely some best practices that give you better results by doing it a certain way. But it is by no means the only way. And if just because it might be the best way doesn't mean it's the best way for you. You got to find what works for you and what makes you happy and what you're having fun with. And that is when you're doing it right. When I say the myth is I'm doing it wrong, the fifth, I have my notes of myths, I'm doing it wrong. You are doing it wrong if you're not having fun. But that is the only rule. There is no hard and fast rule about the proper way to quilt. I once heard a story years ago about another shop that somebody came in and told me that they were shopping at this other shop and the lady wouldn't sell them fabric because it didn't match. She refused to sell it to them because it was just wrong. Are you going to put that with that? I can't sell it to you. That's wrong. And that's not proper. That's not right. Because if it works for you and it makes you happy, then that's all that matters. Because at the end of the day, like I said, this is a hobby. Nobody needs to quilt. Nobody has to make a quilt. And quite honestly, if it comes down to you need something to keep you warm at night, there's much cheaper alternatives than a quilt. We do it because it's fun. And there's no wrong way to do it if you're enjoying yourself. And like I said, there are some better techniques to get better results. But like I'm sitting here, and if you've been to our store, in the studio we have a Quilt Works macaw on the back wall, and I'm sitting here looking at it thinking it is a gorgeous quilt. And everybody that was in that class made that quilt was absolutely gorgeous. I'm looking at it now, it's gorgeous. And I can appreciate that it's gorgeous, but I can tell you this, I will never make it. It's just not something I would enjoy doing. And it's not that I would do it wrong, it's just I wouldn't do it to give it its full glory, as it were. And there's nothing wrong with that. Find what makes you happy when it comes to quilting, and then you will find that it's fun. And that's what it's all about, it's being fun. I think that's all I had. Did I cover all that, Eddie? Is that good? And did I bore you all to death with my? I mean, this was like a monologue today. Like there was no real good visual aids except for that quilt with the old quilt, which you can't even get that fabric anymore, which is going to get me in trouble because somebody's going to be like, "Where can I get that fabric?" That was, I believe, that's a thimbleberry from back in the day. But I think that's all I've got. What did I miss, Eddie? Is there any myths that I should bust real quick? When I say there's no wrong way to quilt, I have to take that back. Well, no, I won't take it back. But you should see how Eddie does binding. It's precious. If you want to feel good about your bindings, just come in and look at an Eddie binding, and you'll be like, "Wow, I sew pretty good." And you know what? It's all right because Eddie likes the quilts he makes, and he's happy with it. So So I bust his chops a little bit, but. But that's, like I said, it's part of the magic of it. And anyway, at this point I'm rambling. But that's the top 5 myths. Polyester thread, mixing fabric is bad, your borders need to match, there's a standard quilt size, and I'm doing it wrong. Those are the 5 myths. There's a lot more myths, I'm sure, but those were the 5 I wanted to get into today. And because we're trying to make the algorithm, put in the comments below what you think is a quilting myth. And then share and subscribe. Did I say that right? I feel like drooling on myself when I said that.
You sounded like it a little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah. That cat saying reminded me of one that Ethan said Alan said, which is, he sounds like he would skin a fart to save a dime and ruin a $5 pocket knife.
Okay. I guess skin a fart to save a dime and ruin a $5 pocket knife. All right, since we're talking about stupidity, years ago, one of my first jobs, if you're from Claremont, you'll appreciate this. One of my first jobs was at T-Bird on Washington Street. Is it still called T-Bird? I think it's still called T-Bird. And this is back in the day. We were a couple kids, and one of our favorite things to do was to super glue quarters to the ground outside the window, because when you come into T-Bird, you've got right behind the window there, you can watch people coming in and out, and it used to be real fun to watch people there's a quarter, try and get it. It was super glued to the ground, and it would always be hysterical because there's some people would figure out what was going on, and they would just laugh and just go on about their day. And then other people would get angry. They would be so mad once they figured out what was going on. They'd come into the store and be like, "Somebody super glued a quarter to the ground out there. Can you believe kids these days?" And, we were like, "Yeah, we're those kids." But that used to be fun. And it was really interesting, the different reactions. Like, and then some people would just realize what was going on, get up and walk to their car like nothing happened, and then like I said, it was fun. And we found that quarters made people madder. Dimes were interesting. People tended not to bother with it, but nickels was the other one. Quarters and nickels. I don't know if it was the size, but if they couldn't pick the quarter up, you got more mad people off the quarters, and then nickels also got more people to stop and try. But dimes nobody cared about. Dimes is like the redheaded stepchild of coins. Lines can't cross. Oh, that's a really good point. We could spend a lot of time talk about that, but we'll just cover that real quick. Yes, when it comes to top stitching alarm quilting, is you don't want to cross lines. Yeah, you can cross lines. Nothing wrong with crossing lines. But yeah, some people have a real problem with that. I will say one thing to keep in mind, and this comes up kind of going back to thread, and if we're talking about actually top stitching as well, one of those things to keep in mind is the effects that you're going to get from like crossing lines and kind of backtracking on lines. Is if you're using a variegated thread, keep in mind that a variegated thread is going to look better as single lines and not a lot of backtracking and all that sort of stuff. So, while there's not a hard and fast rule, you will get better results based on what you're doing. Some stuff. Anyway, I think that's all I've got. Now that we just did a complete tangent on like everything else. All right, what am I on? I'm on that one there. So, you can notice my haircut. That's a sweet haircut. Found a place down in Keene that does a nice job with the beard and the haircut, straight razors, the whole thing. It's good stuff. Anyway, thanks for joining us for another episode. So on, and be excellent to each other.